This podcast is sponsored by ebookit.com, self-publishing solutions for the independent author and small press. Visit us today at ebookit.com.
Welcome to the Toastmasters Podcast, the official podcast of Toastmasters International. Hello, everyone. This is Greg Gazin. We often use simple words interchangeably, but they can often carry entirely different connotations. Two examples of the words kind and nice. Our guest today will once and for all help us with this kind versus nice dilemma. He's Ben Guttmann, an experienced marketing executive and communications expert, and author of Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. Ben is on a mission to get leaders to more effectively connect by simplifying their message. Ben is a former co-founder and managing partner at Digital Natives Group, an award-winning agency that worked with the NFL, I Love New York, Comcast, NBC Universal, the Nature Conservancy, and other major clients. Currently, Ben teaches digital marketing at Baruch College in New York City and consults with a range of thought leaders, venture-backed startups, and other brands. Ben's article, Kind versus Nice Communication, Learn How to Deliver an Effective and Considerate Evaluation, can be found in the May 2024 edition of the Toastmaster magazine. Coming to us from the Big Apple, New York City, Ben Guttmann, welcome to the Toastmasters Podcast.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
Well, Ben, it's funny. These two simple four-letter words, kind and nice. When I read your article, it was eye-opening. These imperfect synonyms that can have such different connotations. So to kick things off, could you perhaps tell us from your perspective, what do these two words really mean, how they're so different, and maybe why it's important to understand the differences?
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned, I'm from New York, and this is a part of the world that is known particularly for being not necessarily always nice, but I would argue that New Yorkers are very kind. The difference here is these are two words, again, on their face that sound very similar, that seem to be the same thing in our minds. But if you look at what we actually mean by them, they're quite different. Kindness and nice is not the same thing. Nice is surface level. It's about being pleasing, polite, sometimes even conflict avoidant in that. It's about the superficial, everybody's happy and we're moving on into the next thing. Kindness, though, goes much deeper. Being kind means you actually care about others and their well-being. It's about the outcomes, not the process necessarily. And I think that's very important as a differentiator, is that we're ultimately, if you could be nice, that's great. But what we're looking for in terms of results is we want somebody to be kind.
Can you give us a couple of examples of each?
Oh, yeah. So in the article, I talk about an example of walking into your apartment building, right? And the first neighbor, and you have an armful of groceries, and you're struggling to open the door. You see two of your neighbors leaving at the same time. The first one is all smiles. They're waving hello, asking how your recent vacation went. How's your cat feeling? What are your plans for the summer? But your arms are just tired and tired and tired. They give way. You're about to drop the bag, but your neighbor keeps gabbing on. Finally, they bid farewell and you resume, juggling your groceries. That neighbor is nice, but I would argue that they're not necessarily being that kind. Your second neighbor, they're rushing through the lobby. They're looking, a little upset. They're fiddling with their phone. They're distracted. In their hurry, they slam through the door, almost knocking you out. But they look up, see you, and hold the door open for you to scurry inside just before everything falls out of that grocery bag. By the time you turn around to thank them, your neighbor's long gone. I would say in that scenario, that second neighbor, not necessarily being as nice, but they're being more kind. That's an exaggerated example, but you get the sense there, which is that one of them is prioritizing their own interests in the encounter. The other one is prioritizing yours.
That's interesting, because in the first scenario, it's almost like the neighbor has his questions or her questions already pre-planned and totally oblivious to what your concern is or what your situation is. And the second one is more along the lines of, okay, well, I did my duty. I held the door open and now I'm just going to move on and have a nice day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you another example that I always find funny is talk about New York, going back to that. If you go back a couple of decades, we had a mayor here named Ed Koch, who was kind of a caricature of what you think a New York City mayor would be. When he was in office, they installed a number of no parking signs across the city that didn't say, hey, no parking Monday through Friday, this time to that time. It said, don't even think of parking here. And I would argue, not very nice, very kind. It gets the point across. You're not confused by the message. You are ultimately getting what they're trying to communicate. And you're going to be better off by not getting that parking ticket than by somebody, kind of mealy mouth being polite to you.
That's interesting. As I was preparing for this interview, I started thinking about the word nice and kind. And I started thinking about George Carlin about, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't he nice? Isn't she nice? One of the things that popped into my head, nice can be people, but it could also be things like an adjective. Oh, that's a really nice shirt. Those are a great pair of shoes. But kind, you can't say that a pair of shoes are kind, but you can only say that people are kind. And I'm wondering if there's a connection there, or is it just like, okay, great, that's kind of a strange thing to say.
I haven't put the kind of Carlin piece, the two plus two there together for that, but I think that's a really good point. I think that the kindness part it's very human, right? It's what we want when we're trying to communicate, is to have our point being heard, have our point being understood and acted upon ultimately. Yes, I think that there's definitely something to that where it's not necessarily just something in the abstract that's surface level, because surface level stuff, as you're saying, could be the shoes, could be the shirt, could be whatever. It's about what are you actually trying to get across from one person to another.
In the article, you say that kind and nice are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Can you perhaps elaborate on that?
Certainly. You don't have to be rude to be kind, but to be kind, you have to, again, care about the outcomes. You have to care about the well-being of the person on the other side. And that should take priority over the politeness, the please, and the thank yous that are there. They're certainly not mutually exclusive. And I would argue that actually most of the time, they are pretty heavily overlapped in terms of those two Venn diagrams. If push comes to shove, it's more important for you to care about what, again, the actual outcome is of the communication. The article talks about this in terms of feedback a lot. When you just tell somebody in terms of the feedback, either in a Toastmaster context or beyond, that was good. That was nice. That was pretty good. Even if it wasn't that good, and you kind of say, hey, I enjoyed that, clap, clap, and move on. You're prioritizing your comfort in that situation and the kind of decorum in the moment over giving somebody feedback that actually will make a difference at the end of the day. That doesn't mean you can't provide feedback that is both nice and kind. You don't have to be rude in your feedback, but you certainly should prioritize making sure that the point of feedback is understood, which is that person can improve upon.
So would it be fair to say that nice and kind would be interchangeable if we're talking about a casual conversation where it's like, oh, he's a nice person, she's a kind person, et cetera, et cetera? And then when you're saying they're not interchangeable, is that because you're saying that nice is more general, pleasant, whereas kind implies more of an emotional connection or maybe a deeper sense of empathy? Am I on the right track there?
I think generally, again, I think that the point of kind is that the material outcomes are what's important, not so much the surface level decorum, the surface level feeling. I think that when it comes to feedback, when it comes to helping somebody through the door, when it comes to helping somebody through parking, is that you care about that person improving, you care about that person being able to get home without dropping their groceries, you care about the person not having their car towed. Those are more important to get across, and those should come first in terms of what is your priority in terms of communication. And then if you can do it in a way that is also polite and that is also friendly and that is also leaves everybody smiling, that's obviously better. Of course, it's important that you care about the outcome in the receiver more than you care about your own feelings as the sender.
Okay, so that means that there can be a time where it's okay to be kind but not nice. Is that right?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, exactly. And in those examples again, right? If somebody is, in danger, right? If there's a car accident or, the firefighter's trying to get people away, they don't really need to say please and thank you, right? They should direct you to where you're going to be safe or something. That's the kind of thing that's really important.
So let's talk a little bit about how this applies if we're talking about Toastmasters feedback. And of course, in Toastmasters, it's extremely important that every speech, every presentation be evaluated. So how does kind versus nice apply in this context?
We'll talk about kind of three attributes for this. The first one is under the heading of benefits, right? What's in it for you? When we're talking about the feedback we're giving, again, we don't want to just say, that was really great, or that was a little boring. We want to explain why. right? What were the things that made that work or didn't make that work? Because in the world of feedback, the because is the goal, right? It helps your listener connect the input to a reason and helps them improve going forward. What's also interesting, by the way, is there's some research that shows the word because, if you say that this was boring because of this or this was interesting because of that, it carries its own little bit of magic, right? We really like to have reasons behind something. And I can tell you from being on the other end of this, when I've worked with clients and you're trying to get something, trying to manage feedback from them, is that if you're able to say, well, we did this because of that, or we did this, that because of this, you're able to get a lot more buy-in from the receiver on that end. People don't just like hearing things kind of in the abstract because they can kind of push them aside and say, this is your opinion. But if you say because, well, that starts to link this causation in there. It becomes more about the facts of the case here and less about somebody's opinion for something.
It's the why then.
Exactly. Yes.
I love in the article that I guess you're talking about the photocopier where people were standing in front of the photocopier and you needed to cut in because I have to make copies, which, I mean, that's why you're there. But tell us a little bit about that one.
Oh, yeah. So this is a famous study from nearly 50 years ago. Ellen Langer at Harvard University. She ran a number of different experiments. One of them, probably the most kind of notable, was you had a bunch of, I guess, Confederates of the researchers. They had a handful of copies. They saw a line at the university library, and they just asked to cut. And if they just asked to cut, people said, no, I'm not, I'm waiting for copies myself. I don't need to do that. But if you added a reason, and it doesn't have to be a real reason, just the word because, and you say, because I have to make copies, instead of saying, oh, because I'm, late for a class, or because I need to, go pick up my kid from school. You don't even have to give those real reasons. You could give a circular logic reason, which is because I have to make copies. And that would increase the likelihood that somebody lets you cut in by up to 50%. There's a whole bunch about this. If you read Robert Cialdini's kind of famous book, Influence, that's where I first heard about this study years ago. If you want to look into some of these magic words here, I highly recommend that. It's very interesting. It's a bit of an aside. This goes back to this idea of kind of, the benefits, the so what of this.
Right.
If you want to start to get to the root cause of why we buy anything, is we say, well, so what? It's like sales 101 type of stuff. And again, slight aside here, but it does relate to some of the stuff here. If you ever worked in sales and marketing, the first thing that you're going to learn is that we don't buy features, we buy benefits, right? We don't buy the thing, we buy what the thing does for us. You can start to tie those things together by asking that question, so what? Which is kind of the inverse of that because. And when you use that tool, you can start to get closer to what actually motivates us, especially because you can use that tool several times going down to get from functional benefits to emotional benefits to our core motivations.
Great. Okay, so that's the benefits. So that's the first principle.
Yep. And the second one is focus. The next step in effective feedback is to maintain focus. What is the one thing that the receiver needs to hear? Focus is hard for us for two reasons. Number one is it's tempting to throw in polite asides to help soften the anticipated blow of this critical note. And then the other one is that evaluators, we're often unsure of what we actually want to say. And by sprinkling around a few phrases here and there, it allows us to kind of get through the task at hand without breaking too much sweat. We're able to filibuster our way enough and kind of get out of that. Simplicity, focus, these are hard things. Right? There's nowhere for us to hide when we're giving that type of feedback. It's also useful to highlight in many ways what the receiver did well, authentically, which can help prime them to receive the rest of your feedback. But don't confuse the two. Don't confuse authentic, genuine appreciation with the sugarcoating, polite asides that can throw somebody off track from what it is you actually want them to understand.
Now, what if they're a person that specifically, they're very fearful, that if you say something negative, they're going to run for the hills? How would you do that without totally sugarcoating it?
Oh, that's hard. I mean, there's the old kind of framework of the kind of compliment sandwich, compliment Oreo, depending who you ask, where you basically say a nice thing, you say the critical thing, you say a nice thing again. That certainly does work, and there's quite a bit of evidence to say that does work. That's going to be hard. That's going to be depending on knowing your audience. It kind of leads us a little bit into that third piece of this, which is empathy. When we're practicing empathy in our feedback, we're able to put ourselves in the shoes or put ourselves in the understanding of the people we're talking to. Empathy is understanding your counterpart, right? It's meeting them where they are in terms of language, emotions, motivations, and more. If you take a moment to put yourself in their shoes and attempt to figure out why did they do what they did, right? Why did they say what they said? You're going to have a lot better understanding of how you can give feedback that's actually going to land. If we look at how did they get to this point where they chose this topic, how did they, where does it fit in their Toastmasters journey? We're able to, train this hard muscle here of empathy. And when we do that, we can ultimately better understand them, and we're going to be better equipped to deliver the kind feedback that is important in a language that they will connect with.
Now, in the article, you mentioned how empathy is a hard muscle to train. I'm just curious what you were thinking when you wrote that.
Yeah, this is one of those things that when I talk about it in the context of communication, it's about speaking in the language that our audience understands, right? Meeting them where they are in terms of the literal words that you're using, but also their motivations, their emotions. We are designed in a way that we overestimate how much we represent the population as a whole. It's called the false consensus effect. I'll give you an example of how this works. I might say, well, my favorite flavor of ice cream is mint chip, right? And I think I'm a pretty normal person. So I think that most people probably like mint chip. Some people might like chocolate, some might like vanilla, but it's probably mint chip. If I were to guess, I would say 70% of people, that's their favorite flavor, right? But when you look at the actual results, if you look at surveys for it, right, maybe it's 10% of people like mint chip. Maybe more people like chocolate, vanilla, maybe Oreo, right? This is the kind of thing that happens when people look at ice cream flavors. It happens in terms of business, it happens in terms of politics. You think that everybody's voting for who you're voting for, right? How can anybody see the other way around? It all goes to show that our default is that we overestimate how much we represent the mean, and we say, hey, you know what? We don't need to understand the audience because I understand me, right? And I'm pretty normal, right? And so this is how you get to a point where if you're in my universe in marketing, you will spend thousands or millions of dollars to run in the wrong direction instead of doing a little bit of testing, trying to figure out empathetically, how does my audience need to hear this message for them to understand it? And it could be a big giant focus group you do, or it could be just a little small conversation you do. If you're able to do a little bit of that homework ahead of time, you can save yourself a lot of grief. So that's what I'm getting to of empathy here is we're in situations where we overestimate how much we represent the mean. We overestimate how much the bubbles that we're in represent the population as a whole. And it just takes more work than we think to be able to speak to somebody where they are.
That's interesting. So these are 3 principles that you can use both in your life, but also in showing feedback in Toastmasters. I like how you focus on the benefits. That's whether you're buying a product or whether or not you're talking about how well someone did, and then focusing on what they need to hear. And I guess it's also the way you deliver it in terms of the sugar coating or non-sugar coating, and then try to be empathetic. That makes a lot of sense. Now, in the article, Ben, you mentioned how practicing kindness has both physical and mental benefits, and I thought that was quite interesting. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Oh, absolutely. So this is pretty interesting. And again, there's the real benefit of being kind, which is that you get your point across, right? You are communicating. If you're trying to sell something, people might buy it. If you're trying to inform somebody of something, they might understand it. They might vote for the person you want, donate to the cause that you want. They might heed the warning that you're trying to give them, whatever that message is. That's obviously the biggest result of this. But if you want to be selfish about it too, there's evidence that shows that practicing kindness can release oxytocin in your brain, which results in what's known as a helper's high, right? Generosity through kind communication and other acts is shown to be tied with all sorts of health effects: lower blood pressure, less depression, greater happiness, and even a longer life. It turns out that the more you help others instead of yourself, the better you feel. So even if the altruistic, the reasonings for this are not enough, if you want to be selfish about it, it's still better for you to be kind.
I never thought of that. That's interesting because I've been a Toastmaster now for 22 years. I do a lot of evaluations. I'm also constantly evaluating myself, and sometimes I'm probably harder on myself than I am on others. And I'll have to remember that, how it's practicing kindness it's good for the health, good for the body, good for the soul. I love it.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your book.
Certainly. Yeah. So I mentioned before my book, Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them, came out a few months ago from Barry Kohler Publishers. It's been a ton of fun being able to talk about this on podcasts, on stages, on writing about it, and seeing how many people have really kind of gelled to this book over the last few months. The idea is that when I ran a marketing agency for 10 years, the same question would come up over and over again. And it still comes up when I'm in the classroom, by the way, teaching the next generation of marketers. They say, well, why do some messages work when others don't? Right? Why do some advertisements, sell a bajillion units? Why do some campaign slogans, again, elect presidents? Why does some other ones fall flat? It turns out that the answer is simple. That the answer, and that's not particularly revelatory, right? The best communicators, the best brands that are simple. They're easily perceived first, easily understood, and easily acted upon. And that's not particularly revelatory. But what's interesting is that the how of getting to simple and the why of why it works are surprisingly deep and surprisingly complicated. And it all comes down to this idea, and I'll give you a little bit of the thesis here, a little bit of the science behind it. This idea of fluency. And so when you ask a cognitive scientist about the word fluency, they're going to say it's a little bit different than what it's related, but a little bit different than how you and I might know it, right? Well, you and I, we know fluency as being fluent in English or Spanish or Mandarin. You could be fluent in cheese or wine or whatever your interest is. But if you ask a cognitive scientist, they're going to say fluency describes how easy is it for you to take something from out in the world, stick it in your head, and make sense of it. Right. And it turns out that the more fluent something is, the less mental cycles, the less kind of processing power you have to do to perceive and understand and act upon something. Well, we like it more, we trust it more, and we're more likely to choose it or buy it. All the things that we want people to do. And the opposite of that's also true, right? Which is that if it takes a lot of work for us to understand something, for us to see something, we don't like it, we don't trust it, and we don't buy it. And so we have this gulf here where the senders, when we're in that mode, we have a really hard time getting simple, but receivers, when we're wearing that hat, we all want something to be fluent and simple. And that's what the book is about how do we bridge that gap?
Excellent. Sounds like an opportunity for a follow-up episode sometime down the road.
Absolutely. I would love to be back. It's been a ton of fun, Greg.
Now, Ben, I understand that it's probably not a great idea to assume that the majority of the people out there love, I guess you called it mint chip, but I am going to take a stab and I'm going to assume that 100% of the people need to know the difference between kind versus nice. So I'm going to encourage everyone to take an opportunity to share this episode with your family, friends, and fellow Toastmasters. You can find the Toastmasters podcast at toastmasterspodcast.com, toastmasters.org, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And Ben, before we wrap up, if you could tell us where perhaps people can find you and find your book.
Absolutely. So you can buy Simply Put wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. You can find me at benguttmann.com, BenGuttmann. And from there, you can sign up for my newsletter. You can grab the book, free chapter if you want to grab that. And if you want to team up on something, happy to chat. So feel free to shoot me an email or connect on LinkedIn.
That's great. And Ben's article, Kind versus Nice, Learn How to Deliver an Effective and Considered Evaluation. Don't forget, it can be found in the May 2024 issue of the Toastmaster magazine. Ben Guttmann, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks so much, Greg. Pleasure to be here.
Ever imagined a book written just for you? Introducing Books.ai. We're not just another bookstore, we're the future of reading. Our state-of-the-art AI adapts each book to your specific needs, creating a personalized masterpiece. Visit Books.ai now, that's POOKS.ai, and use the promotion code SPOTIFY for a whopping 50% off. Books.ai, your personalized book awaits.